So make sure you grab your cup because it's time to spill the anime tea. Let's talk about the Bible in anime. A quick disclaimer that this is not a guide for Christians on which anime to watch. I'm going to be talking about lots of different anime and how they use certain references, and some of these references are not the most Christian-like. So, my books. I just thought it would be fun to dive a little bit deeper into the references that anime tends to use and why they possibly tend to use them. So let me start off by saying that there are various degrees of biblical references in anime. We're going to start off with the very light references, which tend to be just certain characters or tropes that align with certain things from the Bible, such as nuns, for example, and priests. And these nuns tend to be on both sides. Most of the time, they can be really good representations of good, or they can be really, really evil. For example, Fullmetal Alchemist does this in the very first part of the manga. This whole story where there is a corrupt priest, who is manipulating people for money, but also getting them to believe that he can create miracles. Fullmetal Alchemist also does a lot of biblical references that we're going to talk about a little bit later on, but another series that talks about or references religious figures, Black Clover, for example. In the first few episodes, we meet the main characters, Asta and Yuno, in a church which is run by a priest and a nun. References to the church and to priests and nuns are often just commonly referenced in a lot of fantasy and magical anime. Another one that does a twist on the whole nun church trope and concept is Fire Force, which has its own separate religion that's kind of inherently based off of Christianity, though, because they have nuns and priests, and they also have prayers even for like dispelling evil and dispelling like the giant fiery demons. And then we move on to the angels that are often seen in tons of anime. There's almost always an angel in a series, especially a magical series. Probably just because, it's fun just to show a character with wings. Sometimes they don't really mean anything other than that. Sometimes they do have a deeper connection. And oftentimes they tend to be overly sexualized because, again, it's some kind of idealized fantasy person. Angels are supposed to be like ideal beings and, of course, example of good and innocence and all that. So, what better way to show that but than with giant anime titties. Not every series does this, though. There is one series called Haibane Renmei, which kind of talks about these creatures who are angel-like and their fall from grace, and now they're living everyday normal lives, and it is more a slice of life type anime. Then, of course, there's other series like Panty and Stocking, that follows two angels who fell from grace and have to fight monsters on Earth. And of course, there's harem anime like Heaven's Last Property, which is questionable if they should even be showing angels, and it only gets worse from there. So I'm not even going to continue with that. But let's move on to the mild biblical references. These are just more, deeper, and they tend to have a very basic meaning and kind of directly relate to whatever story that they're referencing from the Bible. A series that exemplifies this is Trigun, which talks a lot about themes of sins and redemption, like a lot of other stories, but this one specifically kind of goes along with biblical references because there is a very specific character that is a priest that literally bears a cross that he uses as a weapon to fight off evil, as well as a way to atone for his own sins. And of course, there's anime that literally depicts really notable religious figures doing very anime things, like living their everyday normal lives. For example, in the short movie Saint Young Men, Jesus and Buddha are basically roommates trying to live their everyday normal lives in Japan, and it is very adorable. There's also Devil is a Part-Timer, which literally, personifies the devil, and talks about how he escaped to the world after a major war and actually became a good person. And of course, there's just Christianity as religion in anime. For example, in Samurai Champloo, there's this whole part of the story where Christianity is a prominent part of one of the characters' stories because of religious persecution back in the Edo period of Japan. And just in everyday lives of anime characters, such as in Slice of Life series, Kids on a Slope, which features two kids who go to church and whose family is very religious. Let's move on to the heavy biblical references in anime. And this section, I'm just going to be breaking down specific symbols and representations from certain series that really dove deep into certain concepts from the Bible. Neon Genesis Evangelion is definitely very huge on biblical references. Though a lot of the references and these symbols and imagery that is shown in Evangelion, they're very one-to-one connections from the Bible to what they're talking about in the anime, or they're just there to kind of match or continue the aesthetic of everything kind of being based off of the Bible. There are, some things that are very, very detailed and very thought out in their reference to the Bible. For example, the NERV logo actually goes a few layers deep. So the NERV logo, I'm going to put it on the screen, but it basically is the logo of the organization that is responsible for protecting the civilization from these giant alien creatures known as angels. The organization is headed by Gendo Ikari, who is Shinji Ikari's dad. Shinji is the main character of the show, and Gendo has very devious plans. He wants to basically be God, and this is all kind of shown in multiple different variations throughout the show. But the NERV logo, somewhat hiding half of the logo behind a fig leaf, which is the very obvious reference to, the story of creation and the fall from grace, which is the story of Adam and Eve, who used fig leaves to cover their anatomy once they found out that they had certain anatomy after eating from the tree of knowledge. You're probably thinking that the fruit that Adam and Eve ate was an apple, right? Because it was from the tree of knowledge, it should have been an apple leaf, not a fig. But in actuality, the Bible never says that the fruit that Adam and Eve ate was an apple. It was actually speculated to be a fig, henceforth a fig leaf, rather than an apple leaf, and was changed to an apple because apples started to become really popular during that period. The fig leaf itself represents a covering up of the truth or of an object that is embarrassing or distasteful. NERV puts on a front that they are there to help protect the world and do good things, but in actuality, they just use children to play out their own agenda of, getting closer to God and being really powerful. Even Gendo's son Shinji was not spared in his attempt to try to be like God. And the concept of the fig leaf and the tree of knowledge, the fruit of life, all also plays into the story of Adam and Eve. And the story in Evangelion is Shinji's strained relationship with women, and the story of Adam and Eve is that Eve tricked Adam into eating the apple, and therefore women are seductive and led to the fall of man. Death Note also has lots of references that I think are better shown and better exemplified in the series than Neon Genesis Evangelion. The most obvious and well-known example of the symbol in Death Note is the Death Note as an apple, which is shown in the opening sequence towards the end, but it's also referenced a lot throughout the show. There's parts where we see like a basket of apples on Light's desk, and then there's the Death Note next to it, and Ryuk is always eating an apple, so the apple is temptation, and temptation equals the fall of man. It was said in the Bible that after Adam ate from the apple, he couldn't discern between good and evil. And just like that, Light himself, after he touched the Death Note and after he used it, he himself couldn't determine from good and evil, because at first he was trying to kill bad people. It started to become about just killing people who got in his way, and really changing and contorting his character and his concept of good and evil. And because of knowledge, because he touched the fruit, because he ate from the fruit, he now has this purpose or this knowledge of trying to be the savior of humanity, which is again distorted because he can't tell the difference between good and evil now that he is blinded by power and knowledge. And of course, Ryuk gives Light the apple. Ryuk is a god, he's a Shinigami, which is a god of death, and he gives him the apple. Referencing, of course, giving him power. Light kind of acts as a prophet or like a chosen one, which is a common story in the Bible. And of course, there's Fullmetal Alchemist, which I mentioned earlier. It talks about a lot of biblical references, but that's just because there's alchemy, and alchemy is like I believe it's like a subsection of like Christianity, but just a more science-based ideal of it. A really notable example, of course, is the crucified snake logo that is on Ed's jacket, and of course just is the logo of the government. So the concept of the crucified snake, or the snake on a stick, comes from a story from the Old Testament about Moses, who put a bronze snake on a stick to prevent his people from getting bitten by the snakes that God had brought down through his wrath, and heal his people. So therefore, a snake on a rod represents healing and saving. And in alchemy, alchemists back in the day took this to mean that they could do the same by stabilizing an active principle, which at the time was mercury, I believe, and using it to heal people. And of course, the concept of alchemy in Fullmetal Alchemist is to change the form of one thing through equivalent exchange, to try to save and heal people, and more specifically, to try to save and heal people from the mistakes of alchemy, of using alchemy incorrectly, and from thinking that they are godlike because they can, perform this sort of magic or miracle that changes the compounds of one thing to make it something else. They are reminded that they are only human when they attempt to try to bring people back, and it tends to fail. And they have to sacrifice a part of themselves in the process. So what's the purpose of all of this biblical or religious imagery? Like, why is it so used, and what does it even mean? There's many different things. You can go down entire rabbit holes of biblical references in anime, but I think this is a universal story. The Bible is universally known. There are many different parts of the Bible that can be interpreted in several different ways to mean very specific things about life and death and sins and saving people and just trying to be a good, decent human being. There are so many more specific symbols that I can go into that are often shown in some of our favorite anime, but I already did that in another video, which you can go watch. It's going to show up somewhere on your screen over here. Thank you so much for watching this video. My name is Phoenix. This has been the Anime Tea, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!